Welcome to After Hours, Conversations for Music Educators, presented by Amro Music. This is where we share ideas and work towards solutions to better serve your students. This week, Nick Averwater talks with Dan Emery, the founder and CEO of the New York City Guitar School. They'll be discussing effective techniques for practicing that can apply to any instrument and even go beyond music. This conversation was recorded February 16th, 2021.
Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to After Hours, Conversations for Music Educators. Man, I'm super excited for tonight's conversation. We're going to have a ton of fun, and it's been a long time since we have talked about a non-COVID related topic, and because of that, I'm really excited to dive in and talk about something other than the coronavirus. But before we do, and before I introduce our guests, we've got just some housekeeping things that we want to walk through together. First off, if you have any questions or you'd like to interact with Dan and I tonight during the conversations, you're more than welcome to do so. Please use the Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen. That's what Dan and I can see during the conversation, and that will allow us to interact with you to answer any questions that you might have. Now, looking at the calendar ahead, our next After Hours conversation is going to be on March 9th. March 9th, we're going to be going through recruiting ideas for the upcoming spring, summer, and fall. We're going to have a panel of educators sharing all of the things that they did to have a successful recruiting class last semester during coronavirus and what they're planning to do for the upcoming fall. So it should be outstanding. And again, if you're looking for this conversation or any of our previous conversations, you can find them online at www.amromusic.com/after hours. So we're very excited about tonight's conversation and look forward to welcoming our guest. Dan, how are you tonight? It's good to see you.
I am doing awesome. I am so happy to be here. I'm thrilled to talk to music educators and talk to anybody about practice.
Fabulous. Well, Dan, of course, you and I have had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time together, but if you don't mind, just share with our listeners a little bit about who you are and then tell us about your guitar studio, NYC Guitar Studio.
I am like a lot of owners of music schools in America. I started out as a guitarist. I was playing guitar, hustling, practicing, playing in bands, making a couple records. And I also taught music lessons. And it was kind of a miracle. Step by step, I just got really, really into teaching and really into the business side of teaching. And pre-COVID, we had 5 locations and a couple thousand students. We've lost a few of those locations because of COVID, but the crazy thing is we're now teaching students from over 25 states and multiple countries. So it's just a crazy time, but whether COVID's happening or whether COVID's not happening, when you're there with your guitar, when you're there with your instrument, it's still all the same fundamentals about practicing to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're going to really spend a lot of time tonight is you've spent a lot of time studying both as a musician yourself, but also as a teacher. What does effective practice look like and what are the components, the elements of a successful practice period? And we're going to unpack that together and really start to pull apart each of those components. But start with when you started your studio, you and I discussed that really the way you viewed practice and the role of it in a musician's development and the role within your studio has evolved over the years. Can you just take us and walk us through that evolution?
Absolutely. So many of the people listening to this call were like me or many of our guitar teachers. No one had to tell us to practice. We practiced for hours a day. That's what our parents told us to quit practicing and take out the garbage, right? When I started teaching, I thought I was teaching guitar. That's what I thought I was teaching. And it took me a while to figure out that I wasn't actually teaching guitar. I was teaching human beings. I was teaching people. And no matter how hard I pushed, no matter how hard I tried during that lesson, during that limited amount of time that I was with the student, the thing that was really going to make them successful was what they were doing when they were not with me. So this was coming into focus for me over the years, and I was really getting into this idea of teaching people, not teaching guitar, not teaching technique, but teaching people. But it really came into focus as my business started to blow up a little bit. We crossed $1 million in revenue. We were getting a lot of students. People really liked how it felt, and I started to kind of get into the business of it, and I wanted to grow the business. But I really found myself kind of turned off by the feeding the beast, feeding the machine of, keeping the rent paid, keeping up with payroll, all that. I know you and your wife are both business owners. You may relate a little bit, right? There's this whole machine. You went into it because you loved music, and now there's this big machine. And I said, I remember this moment when I told my team, I said, listen, you know what? I don't want to try to get more new students. I don't care about growing anymore. I care about how long our students stay with us. And we called that, we made up a term. We called it high commit student. And I said, forget revenue. I don't care about revenue. Forget how many new students we're getting. How long are they staying with us? And I loved that mind shift because there's only one reason they're going to stay, because they're enjoying themselves and they're making progress. And there's only one way they're going to make progress. That's if they're not only doing work with us, but they're going home and doing it on their own. So that's when I really realized, oh, wait a minute. We feel like there's not enough time guitar is huge. Music is huge. You don't have time to cover everything, right? But I realized, wait a minute. We don't have time not to cover what you do at home. We don't have time not to say, oh, this is how practice works. This is how to encourage yourself in practice. This is how to make your practice more effective. And we actually made a book, which called The Ultimate Guitar Workbook, a handbook of personal greatness, one lesson at a time, where instead of teaching guitar lessons, it has 20 lessons on how to practice and how to understand practice. And when we made that switch, that in our mind shift, that really what we were doing was building stronger people who could reach their goals and practice on their own. The crazy thing is, those things that I had said I'm not worried about, our revenue tripled, we opened up multiple locations, we got lots more new students. But the real key is because we realized, oh, we're not teaching guitar, we're teaching people. And the key to teaching people is to make stronger people. And in guitar, that means they need to know how to practice.
I love that. And man, I mean, it translates so easily to across, just music in general. And I have to admit, I think there's a small percentage of musicians learning to play who are probably like yourself. They have the intrinsic willpower and they just fall in love with the instrument itself. And they say, hey, this is what I love doing. And I go home and practice because my band director, my orchestra teacher, my guitar teacher, because I love it, not because they tell me. And then I think there's another group of people that I don't have any data, but I think would probably be the majority, who they like music because there's the ensemble component, the rock band, the band, the orchestra, the performances, the relationships that get built. And practice isn't quite as important in that. And so there's definitely a role of willpower that goes along with this. And I love that the approach that you all take includes the people like me who maybe didn't have the willpower to fall in love with their instrument itself, but can learn to fall in love with the process of advancing and practicing. So for you guys, I mean, practice is not a binary activity. Did you complete your practice log and practice for 15 minutes? I mean, that mentality of practice probably makes you cringe a little bit.
Well, yes and no. I mean, there's just so many aspects to practice. And one of the aspects is, did you practice or not? And speaking as a guitar teacher, there's been a lot of times when I've had students in my life, I just wanted them to practice. Even a little bit of practice would have been better than nothing. Some practice is better than no practice. But of course, you're right. Perfect practice is even better. And one thing I love about practice, you can actually practice practicing. You can get better at practice. And it's not just, it is very important for those people, like in my business, with a lot of adult guitar students, they're actually a little bit, sometimes they're afraid to practice or intimidated to practice, or it feels like too much. It feels like they can't do it. So there's breaking it down for them. But even if I could go back in time and say, Dan, it's great that you're practicing for hours a day, but slow down, take it chunk by chunk. They're good practice habits, no matter how motivated you are and how much time you're putting in.
Absolutely. So Dan, let's dive in. Can you just give us an overview of what some of the tenets and principles of effective practice are, and then let's individually walk through them together and pick them apart?
Yeah. So the first thing is, are you practicing or not? And let's start with that. And one of the most effective ways to practice is, and I've been doing this for a long time, but just in the last couple of years, a book came out, Atomic Habits by James Clear. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. Wow, this really is a great book for anybody interested in practice. And the idea is that you need a place and a time to practice. You need regularity. You need to make it part of your life. You need to take willpower out of the equation. So what we tell our students is we say, give yourself a trigger and a place. So for example, it might be after I drink my morning coffee, I will practice guitar in my home office. Now, one thing I love about this is it's not just for music, it's for anything in your life. So really what I do is after I drink my morning coffee, I spend 25 minutes writing my blog post or other writing that I do. But you need a trigger. And if you just depend on intrinsic motivation, if you depend on remembering, if you depend on feeling like it, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for most people. So one thing that I do with my students, and I encourage other teachers to do, is ask your students to answer that question. Say, what will be the thing that reminds you to practice, and where will you do it? I'll practice when I come home. I'll go to my bedroom, pick up my guitar, and practice. After dinner, I'll grab my guitar at the dinner table, practice. If you're an adult, a parent, after I put my kids to bed, I will take my guitar and I will practice in the room while they're going to sleep, and they can fall asleep listening to mom or dad, have a little me time, right? So having your students say this aloud, especially in a group, is, with my students, with my group class students, has been very effective. Do they do it every time? No, but even to have that target in mind makes a big difference. So that's the first part of establishing a practice routine. I've got a trigger and I know where I am. Now the next thing that I think is really helpful is creating a ritual, an entry point. Because what happens with a lot of guitar students is you sit down and you're like, okay, now what am I going to practice today, right? Or what should I do first? And I was thinking of this. We talked last week, I think, and there had just been a blizzard out here, and I work out every morning. My current streak is like 170 days, and I do not feel like working out every morning. I really don't. But the first thing I do is trunk twists. I go like this. And I remember going out on the porch, and man, it was snowing. It was super cold, and I did not feel motivated. And then I started doing my trunk twists, because that's the first thing I do. That's my warm-up. And that warm-up is, it warms my body up, but it's also a ritual. And you know what? After I did my trunk twist, I felt like doing the next thing, some jumping jacks. And after I did that, but I did not feel like doing weighted pull-ups. But then after I did my jumping jacks, I was in it. I was in my practice. So with guitar, we have little pre-recorded videos that we give to many of our beginner students. and they're only about 2 minutes long, and they're easy for the level they are. But they do two things. They reinforce fundamentals, and more importantly, it takes the decision making out of that first part of practice. It creates a ritual to get people started. So in my classes, I run my students through that warm up, and I say, when you go home, where's that? After dinner in the kitchen. After dinner in the kitchen, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to rub your hands together, and then you're going to stretch your fingers. You probably don't have to do that to practice guitar, but now you're in it. Now you're in your practice routine. And then depending on the level, you go through your 8 open chords. I realize I'm talking to people who teach. I mean, my mind is blown away by what orchestra teachers do. I teach guitar. You people teach, like 150 instruments. But the idea is, this is something that you can do in class and teach your students. This is your routine. When you sit down to practice, don't worry about what you're practicing until you do your routine. Now, obviously, there's layer after layer of what you're going to do when you actually practice. But those two things, a trigger, this is when and where I do my practice, and a routine or a warm-up, something to enter that space of practice. I think it's a sacred space, something to make a line between your regular life and your musical life.
I mean, it sounds so simple, and I love it. And I think back to, when I was in band class, I mean, we certainly had a routine when we came into the classroom. And I think a lot of teachers try to create that routine because, quite frankly, when you have 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 kids coming into a room, there has to be some level of order. But I don't ever recall us applying that to the mentality of practice, just that rhythm and that routine. And I love that. Now, with your trigger, one of the things I noticed is that you didn't say a time. You didn't say at 4:30 we practiced. You said an activity, and that kind of gives this certain dynamic component as opposed to a fixed component associated with the trigger. Was that intentional, or, tell me about that?
Absolutely. That's intentional, and the science is clear. You get up in the morning, you brush your teeth. You don't think about brushing your teeth. I mean, most of us don't, right? We just brush our teeth. Now, that's something that happened. You're going to do it at 10 a.m. You're going to do it at 5 a.m. Now, that's a fixed part of your day, and you can attach something to that. I love this stuff. I love this stuff. And by the way, it's actually, I'm in my 50s, so I've had a lot of time to build up little habits. So I stretch my Achilles tendons when I brush my teeth, and I do it without even thinking. Now, I've done it for years, and it doesn't matter what time it is. It's the action. The problem with having it be at a certain time is you might forget to look at the clock, or you might be doing something different. So I am a big believer. Look, if your mind works that way and you're like, 6 o'clock, I'm practicing. 6 o'clock, I'm sitting down, I'm practicing. That's great. But for most people, in my experience, having a trigger in your life is a better way to go.
Yeah, I could see where that would be the point, or the take. Because if you put a time associated to it, if you don't reach that time, it probably increases your likelihood of failure. Well, I didn't get home at 4:30 because I got held up in traffic. Therefore, I'm off the hook to practice tonight. Where you're suggesting, no, by creating it as a dynamic trigger, it increases your odds of practicing substantially. And then I love the ritual too. I mean, I love that you make it simple, you make it clean, that it's not complicated, it's not going through these challenging riffs, it's just as simple as rubbing your hands, stretching them out, and now you're simply in it. You're getting started with the practice. You've taken the first steps. Then I have read the book Atomic Habits. In fact, we've studied it here at Amro. It's a great book. But, they talk about people that want to work out, leaving clothes out the night before and removing any sort of barrier that you might create for yourself, or quite frankly, an off-ramp where you can say, I'm not going to get out of bed today. I don't feel like it, or my clothes are dirty. And you eliminate all of the things that might prevent you from accomplishing your goal.
Yeah, and we tell our students, we get this question all the time. I want to take care of my guitar. People think it needs to be in the case. The problem is if it's in the case, you might not play it. So if you've already got your discipline and practice locked down, by all means put it in the case. But it's more important, like I'm in my daughter's room right now, the bass and the guitar are hanging up on the wall. And I even have read a study where it turns out if the guitar is out, you're more likely to play it. It makes perfect sense. And also there's that friction, like, oh, I want to play guitar. It's time to play guitar. It's in the closet. It's in my case. I'm going to get it out of the case. Now I have to tune it. Or it could be hanging on the wall. That's easier.
Absolutely love that. Okay, so we're in practice now. I mean, we've got our trigger, we've had our ritual, we've got the instrument in our hands. Now what do we do?
So I'm gonna tell you we're gonna take two little roads here.
Okay.
The first road is to understand what science says is the most effective practice. And then I'm going to flip it over and say what we at New York City Guitar School suggest as a practice routine, as a general practice routine. Now, again, I'm going to generalize a little bit because we're talking to people who play different instruments. They're at different levels, but some things are going to be the same no matter what. So when you practice, it's really important that people understand what's happening when they practice. And, we have this sense, oh, the more I practice, the better I'll get. But why? What's happening? And we've also heard Vince Lombardi, practice doesn't make perfect, perfect practice makes perfect. So what is actually happening when you practice effectively? Well, here's what's happening. You're literally changing your brain. And to me, when I first realized this, it was mind-blowing. If you take whatever, intense microscope it would take to look at your brain structure before you practice, and then you looked at it after you practiced effectively, your brain would actually be different. Now, we're very familiar with this concept when it comes to muscles, right? If you lift weights, you get stronger. When your mind tries to do something, it's the same thing. It's exercising. Let's follow this analogy just a little bit to understand what makes perfect and effective practice. We want to change our brain. We want to make our brain stronger. We want to make it capable of doing something that it wasn't capable of doing before. Maybe it's playing a D chord. Maybe it's playing a scale. Maybe it's playing a scale fast with no mistakes. So if I wanted to make my body strong, I would use my body. And for example, I could push air, right? I could push air. Here I am pushing air. Am I going to get stronger if I push air?
Be there a while.
Well, it'll take a while, right? It'll take a while because I'm not challenging my muscles. My muscles have nothing to work against, so they're not going to change. On the other hand, and this sometimes happens, we see guitar students come in, they've played 5, 10 years and they've been playing the same thing for 5 or 10 years. It happens all the time. And they're not making any progress and they're not sure why. It's because it's the equivalent of pushing air, right? If you played Wish You Were Here and that's the only song you play and you're kind of good at it, but you've never played anything else, you're not going to grow. But what also happens in guitar is, so again, if I wanted to get strong, I could go out and I could be like, I want to get strong. I'm going to lift trucks, right? There's a truck out there on the street. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to grab that truck and I'm going to lift it. I'm going to get so strong. Again, what's going to happen? Am I going to get strong? Obviously not. I can't exercise my muscles if I'm not lifting it. So if you try something, and actually in music, it's even worse because at least if I try to lift a truck, nothing happens. But if I try in music to do something I'm not capable of and I mess it up, that unfortunately, that will change my brain. And I will literally change my brain to play things badly, to play mistakes. we have this syndrome called heavy metal teenage guitarist in guitar. And this is classic. The kid's so fired up. The teenage kid is so fired up, wants to play Iron Maiden, wants to play Pantera, whatever. And they're like, a mistake, right? And they're like, oh, I made a mistake. I'm going to do it again even faster and see if I get a different result. Mistake, right? So they're trying to lift trucks. They're getting a bad result. So there's really a sweet spot for practice. And science is very clear about what that sweet spot is. If you practice at a level where you can play whatever you're playing is perfectly 80% of the time, when you're trying as hard as you can, so that's the recipe. That's the recipe for the sweet spot. 80% success at maximum effort. If you can do that, you're training your brain correctly and you're going to make maximum progress. So as a teacher, I can't take my student there right away, right? I can't do that right away. I need to build them up. They have to have a level of trust with me. I have to be able to give them feedback. But once I have that relationship with the student, I want them working really hard at a place where they can be successful. Like that movie Whiplash. Did you see that movie?
No. Tell me about it.
You got to see the movie Whiplash. It's like a nightmare. It is. And I have had multiple teachers who teach for New York City Guitar School who watch that movie and they're like, oh, that was my experience. It's the brutal, mean music teacher who makes you do things that you're not capable of and just screams and yells at you, right? Well, unfortunately, that can work for a few students, but you'll burn out most of the students doing that. And follow the science. The science says put your students in a place where they can be successful most of the time.
Yeah. So, and I noticed with an 80% mentality, I mean, I think I love your analogy to strength training. I mean, if we went in and tried to lift 100% of the weights every single time that we were capable of, we would quickly either hurt ourselves or we'd only be able to do it once and we'd get frustrated. And I even know that, you know, when I go into the gym, some days I have good days and some days I have bad days, and that affects, you know, my ability to lift things. But I love the way that you're saying, hey, let's back off. Let's do it 80% so we can do it right more times than not at 80%. So what are some of the variables? I mean, I think about tempo. I mean, how do you break down and get to that 80% level?
Yeah. So music is so good for this. So tempo is a great example. So if you play something along with a metronome and you can play it 4 times in a row, guess what? If you can play it 4 times in a row, that's the same as 4 out of 5 times. Even if you messed up the next time, it'd be 4 out of 5. That's 80%. So that's when you notch up the metronome a little bit. If you can only play it 3 times in a row, you have no business going. If you have no business, and scientifically, it's not the smartest thing to try to go harder. But when you can do it 4 times in a row, don't worry about doing it 10 times in a row. 4 times in a row, boom, notch up the metronome and play it again. And it's amazing to me how quickly, I mean, you can make progress really fast if you take it chunk by chunk. But there's so many other variables too. So for example, in guitar, it might be, you can do it sitting. Can you do it standing? You can play it. Can you sing and play at the same time? Anything that makes it harder is fair game. Make it harder, a little bit harder, and if you can only do it a couple times in a row and then you make a mistake, back off a little bit. So I think it's important to teach students this. I mean, this is actually kind of a big leap if you've never been exposed to this concept before. The idea that you're literally changing your brain and that you need to input the correct ratios in. And the other thing, and this approach, by the way, is called deliberate practice. There's some other aspects to deliberate practice. It needs to be step by step. It needs to build on itself. It needs to have feedback from a coach. And music is great because you get feedback. You can play along with the recording, and that gives you feedback. If you're not in time with the recording or you're not in time with the metronome, you're getting feedback. But it's hard. it's really hard. And if you do it right, it takes a lot of focus and it's hard. So, so that brings us to the other side. Like, what does practice actually look like? You don't want, you don't really want your student to just be like, okay, I did my 2-minute warm up, bam, I'm right into just like 80% focus. That's like, in my mind, that's the beautiful, intense, amazing part of practice where you really bring up your potential and meet your potential, but it needs a warm up. And in our world, we teach that it's applied in context too. So the first third of practice, we did our ritual, right? We did what got us into the mental space. Now we need to warm up. We need to review our fundamentals. We need to play things that are just completely in our wheelhouse. We need to reinforce rhythm, reinforce our chords, reinforce fingering, reinforce in guitar, like leaving fingers down between chords. Once you've done that, then it's deliberate practice time. Then it's that 80% success sweet spot. Now you're going to work, and you work, again, ideally, you work, and then after you work, what we say is try to apply it in context now. Now back off it again, But like if you were practicing a scale, now play some licks over a song, improvise over a song. Play through some songs. If you're practicing rhythm, take that rhythm into a song. So in our world, in the guitar world, warm up, focused practice, and then skill applied in context. And it's a great recipe. It's a simple recipe. Again, there's layer upon layer of this, but this is something that you can teach your students, and they can totally get, and they can totally apply. And it can be applied if they've got 15 minutes to practice or an hour to practice.
That's what I love, is that it's, I was thinking in my head, okay, if you're going to practice 30 minutes, which I think for a young student who's maybe in 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, that's a pretty good chunk to ask them to practice. And so what you're talking about is really, there's only a 10-minute segment in there that you're saying to expand your abilities. And then, of course, you're applying the thing that you just worked on. And so, I mean, that in and of itself, to me, is a little bit different of a mind shift, like you just talked about, where you're not just coming in just, 100% the entire time for the entire 30 minutes. Give me 10 minutes of very intentional time doing these very deliberate activities, and it'll be an effective practice.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say, because sometimes I have this conversation with other music teachers, and we all dream of that student, and we've all had, most of us have been lucky enough to have that student who's just like on fire, right? They're on fire. They're going to music school. They're doing it all. But the reality is, for most of our students, most of our students at the guitar school, they're viewing guitar not as the main thing in their life. They're viewing it as a hobby or something fun to do with friends. So the question is, how can we make the most positive experience with where we're at in their life? And here's the truth. If they have a good experience practicing 15 minutes a day for a while, then you have a shot at getting 30 minutes, and then you have a shot at getting an hour. So I've heard other teachers say, what? You only tell them that they should practice half an hour a day? And I'm like, yeah, I would love it if all the students practice half an hour a day. And that's what we're trying to get them to.
Yeah, I love that mentality too, is that we have to practice practicing. And then once we get that under control, we can start to build up to it. And I suspect too, it becomes a little bit of a snowball, a flywheel. As we see ourselves developing, we're able to do more of the things that we want to do, that we can enjoy doing. We're motivated to practice more, and hits the flywheel, and just, we keep spinning.
Oh my gosh, that's absolutely true. When you cross that line and you're like, oh my gosh, this is music coming out of this instrument. This is music. It's so motivating, and you really have a chance to fall in love with that feeling of progress, and also with the music.
Yeah. So Dan, I mean, I love the simplicity, because when you break it down into these chunks, it completely makes sense. How do you go about communicating these expectations? Put yourselves in the mind of a sixth grade band or orchestra teacher. You've got a student there who's 12 or 13. They're picking up their first instrument. How do you set those expectations and communicate how practice should look like when you've got a young student specifically?
Yeah. I'm in my daughter's room. She's 17. She's really into music. She got into music in sixth grade. I live in Yonkers, New York. We have an incredible band teacher in this town, Mark Bukowski, legendary orchestra leader, but she didn't join band to be with a legendary orchestra leader. She joined band because the band kids got to eat lunch in the band room with their friends. And so she didn't go in there fired up to practice. She didn't go in there fired up to get really into music. That came later. So the first thing is, I would say the first thing is, be really glad they're there and do what you can with them while they're there. But I think this breakthrough that I made, and I know many of the listeners have already done this, but this breakthrough, realizing that it's important to teach them about practice, not just their instrument, was huge. So I would say teaching them how practice works, teaching them that they are changing their brain, teaching them the concept of a trigger and a place, asking them to articulate to each other, hey, I'm going to practice when this happens in such and such a place, and also giving them a routine and teaching them to do this routine, a 30-second routine, a 1-minute routine, a 2-minute routine, a ritual to get them into practice. Do that in the orchestra room and teach them to do it when they practice. I think these are, and again, I'm not an orchestra teacher, but this is what I've done with my students in my guitar classes, and it really does make a difference.
Yeah, I could see, I mean, as you break it down, again, I'm not a music educator in the classroom either, but you can definitely start to see some curriculum ideas start to take shape, and some activities start to take shape, and even some student accountability things starting to take shape that you can do within the classroom that begins to lay the foundations and the expectations for that at-home practice that can be taught there on day one or week one or whenever you begin to introduce these concepts. Yeah. So Dan, let me ask you this. I mean, you mentioned very briefly that your daughter is very into music. I mean, you're a band dad. I mean, kind of take me through the evolution of a parent watching their child develop. What role can educators ask parents to play in this process? And how did you see this play out in your own daughter's development on her instrument?
Yes. So the first thing is, as a band dad and as a musician and as a music teacher, I feel so strongly about music, not just to teach music, but music to build better human beings. So this is so important. What you put into life is what you get out. What you put into life is what you get out. And sometimes in life, it's kind of hard to connect the dots. But in music, if you practice, you get better. If you practice, you get better. And that lesson is so important and so powerful, and it goes way beyond music. So so the first thing I want to say is I think that as music educators, we should be really proud of ourselves, and because we're really making the world a better place. We're teaching people to work with each other, and we're teaching them to put something in to get something out. For my daughter, It's really interesting. I made a decision that I would not put my kids into music. And she went into this band program. Her band teacher was like a combination of like super inspiring and slightly scary, which I thought was perfect, actually. And that experience for her of being asked to achieve a standard with other people, to be part of something great, it really was a great experience for her. And she came out of that, and she, as she entered high school, she kept playing. She went in a more rock and roll direction, played drums, bass, got into Ableton and Logic and stuff like that. But that idea of putting time in to create something that wasn't there before in herself and in the world, it's just been thrilling to watch. It's as a dad, it feels amazing. And I have to tell you, I don't know whether she'll make a life in music or not, but I have so much confidence in her because I know that she will go out and work at stuff and get it right and be creative and do what she needs to do. I'm so glad that music education has been a part of her life.
Hey, Dan, give me just a minute here, man. My AirPods actually just died. That's the first time this has ever happened. There you go, man. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
Perfect. Sorry about that, man. I just got the little sound saying your AirPods are done. So, well, I love that the lessons that you're talking about. I mean, you're so right. Is that you're not teaching them to really play a guitar. I mean, you're teaching them how to learn and develop other skills. And when you strip away everything about music, whether you're teaching guitar or oboe or violin or whatever it is that you're teaching, I mean, that's really what we're after, is trying to create better humans that you can take those principles and apply them with your kids, or to be effective members of society, or apply them at work when you're learning something new, or whatever it is that we're trying to overcome. We're learning these ideas and these concepts through our musical instrument and getting to experience the joys of that. So Dan, as we kind of approach the 45-minute mark here, let me just hit on some of the highlights again, just one more time. We've got to have our ritual. We've got to have our trigger. We like to break things up into thirds, right? We like to have the first third is devoted to time where we're doing the things that we know. We're getting warmed up. We're getting comfortable. The second third is where we're expanding on the things. We're slowing things down. We're trying to operate at 80% of our fullest potential. And then the last third is when we're using that time to apply the things that we just learned. Are there any bullet points that I'm leaving out of this, or anything else that you want to highlight?
The third and third, that's a rough approximation. That can of course change. I want to circle back on that 80%, that sweet spot, because it's so important. The recipe is, I can be successful 80% of the time if I'm trying as hard as I can. Yeah. And that's exhausting. It's exhausting to focus that much. And it takes time to build up the ability to practice longer. The other bullet point is just what my experience was with our students, how important it is to make time in the curriculum to teach the concepts of practice to the students as well as the music. I thought I didn't have time. Time is so short. I thought I needed to get more guitar information in their heads, right? But really, I didn't have time not to step back and talk about practice.
Yeah, love that. Now, Dan, are there any resources? I know you've got some resources that you've put together for your students. Are there any that you would like to share in case there's some educators that would like to look at them and say, hey, I can make this apply in my band or my orchestra classroom?
Yeah, so we have a book that we give to our students. It's the Ultimate Guitar Workbook, Journey of Personal Greatness, one lesson at a time. And it's got 20 lessons about practice in it. We made a PDF of this. I think the PDF is called Ultimate Guitar Workbook for After Hours podcast. And we've shared the link with you so that your listeners will be able to have it once the podcast is posted. You can just click on that, download it. It's 20 lessons. Some of them are very guitar specific, but most of them are just generally applicable to any kind of music. So your listeners can totally download that and just use it in any way you see fit, make copies of it, whatever. We also have a free guitar course that we sent you a link to. If anybody wants to learn guitar, just go on it. It's the first, it's like 24 videos and a 22-page PDF. You can have fun with that. Give it to any of your students that are interested in guitar. Let's see, what else? I think we sent you a link to a blog post that has some of these basic concepts. And one thing that I'm excited about is we just did a book with Hal Leonard. We've done 6 books, but we just did our first book with Hal Leonard, which I'm really thrilled about because they've got all these awesome copyrights. And what it is it's a book of something like 40 guitar songs. This is guitar specific, but I'm really proud. I'm really excited about it. And they're graded. So the first 4 songs are for just total beginners that only know 2 chords, and so that you can stay in that 80% range and just play right at your level. And the idea is you play the first chapter, and once you've mastered that first chapter, you just move on to the second chapter. So you could actually learn to play guitar, the basics of guitar, just with this Hal Leonard book. It's called NYC Guitar School Songs for Beginners. So I think you have all those links, and I'm excited. I hope that this will be useful to some of the listeners. And if anyone has feedback or questions, hit me up, dan@nycguitarschool.com.
That's great, Dan. Thanks. I do have all the links. I've got them pulled up here. So for all of our listeners, you'll be able to find those at amromusic.com/afterhours, including the 90-page PDF that Dan just talked about that breaks down so many of the great resources that they've organized. So if you're an educator looking for some inspiration on how to get these activities jump-started in your program, what a great resource than what Dan has already put together. Maybe you can copy it, or maybe you can just tweak it to be applicable to your band program. But either way, a great starting point that Dan has put together. So again, those will be available at amromusic.com/afterhours. So Dan, as we approach the 60-minute mark here, is there any final closing thoughts or advice that you'd like to share with our listeners tonight?
Well, one thing is I want to thank, I know that we've got a few New York City Guitar School students listening tonight. So I want to thank you for being New York City Guitar School students, and thank you for coming and listening. Nick, I want to thank you for having me on, and I appreciate what you do. I appreciate what orchestra teachers across America are doing. It's so important. It is, I think it's vitally important work. And I know from talking to people in the schools here in New York, there are some serious challenges for music teachers sometimes. And so I appreciate what you're doing. What's the most important thing? What's the most important thing? I think it goes back to what you put in is what you get out. And the more we can live that and the more we can teach that, the better.
Yeah, that's at the end of the day, that's what music is all about, isn't it? I mean, that's what we're all here to do, is just try to improve ourselves and be a little bit better and get some joy along the way. Well, Dan, thanks so much, man. What great content, some really great ideas that music educators, regardless of what you teach, will be able to apply to their classrooms, to their studios, to their private lessons, whatever it is they're teaching. Some really great things here. So thank you so much for being a part of this. I hope NYC Guitar School just continues to thrive. I'm excited to watch and see what you all do. If anybody's interested in you guys are teaching digitally, if anybody's interested in becoming one of your students, can they go to your website for more information?
Absolutely. nycguitarschool.com. We have students from over 25 states now and multiple countries. We're trying to open up more times for India right now. Actually, that's our big push right now, is to make times available for the Eastern Hemisphere. And luckily, we have some night owls in New York City that are ready to open up times for the Eastern Hemisphere.
Well, good for you all. So, Dan, thank you again. As a reminder, anybody that's looking for this content, amromusic.com/afterhours. And our next conversation is going to be on March 9th. We're going to have a panel of educators together talking about all of the recruiting ideas that they have for the upcoming fall. Just a quick reminder as well, if you haven't punched that subscribe button on your favorite podcast streaming service, be sure to do so. We've got new episodes going directly to the podcast, and that's our After Hours Director Spotlights. Our first episode kicked off last week, and we've got another Director Spotlight next week that we're excited to launch. So be sure to punch that subscribe button because we've got some direct to podcast content that we can't wait to share with all of you. In the meantime, everybody, do stay safe, wash your hands, wear a mask, and we look forward to seeing you on March 9th for Conversations for Music Educators. Dan, thank you so much. Everybody have a wonderful evening. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nick. Take care, everybody.
You've been listening to After Hours, Conversations for Music Educators, presented by Amro Music. This podcast features conversations with music educators who are finding innovative ways to teach their students. You can hear and see more conversations at amromusic.com/afterhours.